So the interactionist approach of schizophrenia. So this is going to look at explaining schizophrenia in terms of nature and nurture and the treatment of schizophrenia from an interactionist viewpoint. So an interactionist viewpoint or approach is holistic. It recognises that a variety of different factors will lead to the development of schizophrenia. So it believes that biological factors as well as environmental factors such as society and cultural factors will lead to the development of schizophrenia. So biological factors could include genetics, such as a schizogene, which is believed to be a single gene that leaves a person vulnerable to the development of schizophrenia. So without that gene, it's not possible to develop schizophrenia, but having the gene alone doesn't mean that a person will develop the disorder. It also recognises that there will be some psychological factors such as dysfunctional thoughts or an environmental trigger that will lead to the development of schizophrenia. So, for example, if a person has that schizogene, it means that they will be sensitive to criticism and family dysfunction and be more vulnerable to the development of schizophrenia. But, for example, if they have an overly critical parent, they will develop the disorder. So they need to have that schizogene and a schizophrenogenic mother or a dysfunctional family with communication patterns that aren't appropriate for the individual that leads to them developing schizophrenia. Now, the diathesis-stress model states that someone is biologically vulnerable to the development of schizophrenia. So that's the diathesis part. But they will only develop schizophrenia if an environmental factor triggers it. So Reed et al. Says that there are different vulnerabilities, such as childhood trauma. So a childhood trauma alters a developing brain, leaving a person vulnerable to schizophrenia. And that can be triggered by someone or some kind of environmental factor. So that could be the development or smoking cannabis, which is seen to be linked to the development of schizophrenia, but only triggering it in a person that is vulnerable to the disorder. Equally, treatment, according to the diathesis-stress model, is mainly used within the UK, where an interactionist explanation of schizophrenia is widely accepted. So within the UK, it's generally accepted that there will be a biological vulnerability to the disorder, but it will only develop through an environmental trigger. So therefore, the treatment is based on this viewpoint, and it's common practice for an individual to be on antipsychotic medication and a psychological treatment such as CBT or family therapy. So the idea is that the medication will offer that short-term benefit of helping with that negative symptom of avolition, that goal-orientated behaviour being reduced, and will give them the motivation needed to take part in CBT and family therapy. If we were to look at some evaluation points then, so there are some practical applications for the interactionist viewpoint. So Tarrier found that patients who were in a combination of treatments showed lower symptom levels in comparison to those who were in the control group, which were only on medication. So that implies that that an interactionist treatment is most effective in treating schizophrenia. Equally, it could help prevent the development of schizophrenia. So it's found that when women developed a certain virus during pregnancy, they were more likely to have a child who would develop schizophrenia. So research suggested that it was only likely to happen if the mother and child carried a particular gene. Therefore, an antivirus medication during pregnancy could be used to protect children of women known to have that gene. So if it was found that the mother carried this gene, they would give them an antivirus medication to prevent them developing this virus, and therefore reduce the risk of a child who would develop schizophrenia later on in life. However, a weakness is it's difficult to conclude that combined treatments support an interactionist viewpoint. So the fact that combined biological and psychological treatments are more effective than either on their own doesn't necessarily mean that the interactionist approach to schizophrenia is correct. We can't conclude that there is a biological vulnerability to the development of schizophrenia and that there is an environmental trigger just because a treatment that works on dopamine levels and environmental factors appears to be effective. It means that we should be cautious suggesting that there's a genetic factor that makes a person susceptible to environmental risks associated with family functioning or communication styles. Now, an example of a 16 marker might be outline and evaluate the interactionist approach of schizophrenia, discuss the interactionist approach of schizophrenia, describe and evaluate the interactionist approach of schizophrenia. So you're going to want to explain to the examiner what the interactionist approach is. So that's the idea. It's a holistic explanation that's going to take into account several factors that could lead to the development of schizophrenia. So it recognises that there might be a biological factor such as genes and neurotransmitters and neural correlates, but there's also societal, cultural and environmental factors that could lead to the development of schizophrenia. You might want to give the example that there could be a schizogene, that means a person is vulnerable and more sensitive to highly critical environments and hostile environments, and they will be more likely to develop schizophrenia if they have a schizophrenic mother or they are in a high EE environment where there's hostile communication patterns. You might then want to move on to the Diathesis-stress model and outline what that is and talk about how a person will be biologically vulnerable but will only develop schizophrenia if there is an environmental trigger. So, for example, childhood trauma might cause there to be an issue with the developing brain, and therefore that person is vulnerable to developing schizophrenia in the future. Equally, you could talk about how that has led to treatment and improving treatment. Then you would want to move on to your evaluation. So try to learn 3 evaluation points to talk about what the strengths of this approach are and what the limitations of this approach are.